One broken soldier came home from the war, not on his feet, but in a wheelchair. Yet, it wasn't the world that welcomed him back. It was his loyal K9, Sierra, standing guard at his side like the last shadow of the battlefield. Winter crept into the small town of Maple Ridge, whispering through the broken windows of the house he once called home. His wife was gone, chasing wealth and comfort, leaving behind nothing but a 5-year-old girl with chestnut curls and a father who refused to let go. This is not a story about medals or parades. It's about a man who fought for his country, lost the use of his legs, and found himself fighting an even greater war, for love, for dignity, for the laughter of a little girl, and the loyalty of a dog who never turned away. Let's unite for every soldier who gave their all for our freedom. Leave a comment with, "In God we trust," if you stand with our heroes. The first snow of early winter had begun to fall across Maple Ridge, a small town nestled between quiet hills and endless pine forests in Vermont. The wind carried a raw, biting chill that cut through the streets, pushing dry leaves across the cracked sidewalks. Streetlights flickered against the dull gray sky, their glow dim and weary, as if the entire town was holding its breath. The roads were slick with melting frost, and a cold fog drifted lazily along the edges of the town square. It was a place that felt forgotten by the modern world. Old brick stores with faded signs, a single gas station with a squeaky pump, and houses with roofs that creaked under the weight of time. Through this town rolled an aging pickup truck, paint-chipped and dulled by years of service. At the wheel sat Logan Carter, a man of 35, his face hardened by war, yet softened by quiet sorrow. He had the kind of presence that once commanded respect on the battlefield: broad shoulders, square jaw, deep-set gray eyes that seemed to carry memories of fire and ash. His short black hair was neatly trimmed, and though his face was clean-shaven, the faint shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and pain that lingered far beyond the physical. Logan was a man who had given everything to his country, only to return with scars that went deeper than flesh. His legs, once his strongest weapon, were now silent. A wheelchair was strapped in the back of the truck, its metal frame rattling softly with every bump in the road. Beside him, with ears perked and amber eyes alert, sat Sierra, his loyal K9 companion. Sierra was a 5-year-old German shepherd, her coat a rich blend of black and tan, her fur thick enough to shield her from the cold. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of a soldier, trained, disciplined, yet deeply empathetic. Sierra had been with Logan through the worst of Afghanistan, where a sudden roadside explosion had cost him his ability to walk, but had spared his life. The dog bore a faint scar across her left ear, a silent testimony to the same battle. Though she could not speak, her every glance at Logan seemed to carry a vow that she would never leave his side, no matter how broken the world became. The truck rattled onto a dirt road leading to a small wooden house, standing alone at the edge of the town. The house looked weary, with peeling gray paint, sagging steps, and windows that were shut tight against the cold. Once, it had been a warm home filled with laughter, but time and neglect had stripped it bare. Logan parked the truck, his eyes fixed on the house, as if trying to summon the courage to face whatever waited inside. The passenger door opened, and Sierra leapt out, landing softly on the frosty ground. Logan reached for the wheelchair, his strong arms moving with practiced precision. He had grown accustomed to the mechanical motions, unfolding the frame, locking the wheels, pulling himself into the seat. Each movement was a silent reminder of the life he once had, of the freedom of running across open fields or climbing mountains that now lived only in memory. As he rolled toward the front steps, the wooden door creaked open. There, standing in the dim hallway light, was Rosie, his 5-year-old daughter. Rosie was a delicate child with chestnut curls that framed her round face. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, and her hazel eyes glistened with a mixture of joy and longing. She wore a simple knitted sweater, slightly faded, and in her small hands she clutched a frayed teddy bear. "Daddy!" Rosie's voice broke the silence like a warm beam of sunlight. Without hesitation, she ran across the porch and threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. The weight of her tiny embrace was both comforting and heartbreaking. Logan's broad hands trembled as he held her, his throat tightening. Sierra padded closer and gently rested her head on Logan's knee, her warm breath curling in the icy air. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Father, daughter, and the loyal dog, together against a world that had turned its back. Logan closed his eyes, taking in the scent of Rosie's hair, which smelled faintly of soap and winter air. He wanted to speak, to tell her how much he had missed her, but the words caught in his throat. Inside, the house felt empty. The furniture was sparse, the walls bare except for a few old photographs that seemed to mock the warmth they once held. Near the doorway sat a neatly packed suitcase, and on top of it, a stack of papers. Logan wheeled himself closer, his eyes narrowing as he read the top page. A divorce decree, already signed. His heart sank, though he had suspected this moment for months. Megan, his wife, had not waited. Megan had once been a vibrant woman of 35, with flowing auburn hair and striking green eyes. Tall and slender, she had an elegance that drew people's attention wherever she went. But life with a soldier had worn her down. The long absences, the constant fear of loss, the financial struggles. And when Logan returned home broken, bound to a wheelchair, Megan saw not the hero who had fought for her freedom, but a shadow of the man she once knew. Logan's hands tightened on the wheelchair's arms as the sound of an engine outside caught his ear. He turned and saw a sleek black car, a Lexus, polished and gleaming even in the dim winter light. Megan stepped out, her white wool coat cinched at the waist, her hair styled perfectly, her lips painted a shade too bright for the gray day. Her heels clicked against the driveway as she walked toward the car's trunk, where a man waited, tall, confident, dressed in an expensive suit. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a gold watch glinting on his wrist. Megan didn't look at Logan. She didn't say goodbye to Rosie. She simply handed her suitcase to the man, climbed into the car, and closed the door with a soft thud. The Lexus pulled away, its tires hissing over the frosty road, and she never glanced back. Rosie, still clinging to Logan's arm, looked up at him with wide, questioning eyes. "Daddy, is Mommy coming back?" she whispered. Logan couldn't answer. He simply brushed a curl from her forehead, forcing a soft smile for her sake. Sierra whined softly, pressing her head closer against his leg, as if sensing his pain. He turned the wheelchair toward the house, rolling over the threshold with Rosie holding on to the armrest. Inside, the cold seemed to seep from the walls. The old wooden floor creaked beneath the weight of time, and the fireplace was dark and cold. Logan inhaled deeply, steadying himself. This was his life now, a broken house, a little girl who needed him, and a loyal dog who would follow him through any storm. Outside, the sound of the luxury car faded into the distance, swallowed by the winter wind. Megan was gone, and with her, the last remnants of the life he once knew. But Logan, sitting in that battered wheelchair, holding his daughter's hand, realized he was still standing in the ways that mattered most. The next morning in Maple Ridge arrived with a pale sun struggling to break through the heavy winter clouds. A thin veil of snow covered the roofs and yards, softening the harsh edges of the small town. Logan Carter sat by the window of his old wooden house, the wheelchair creaking faintly as he shifted his weight. His gray eyes followed the swirling flakes outside, but his mind was on the tasks waiting for him. This house, once lively, now felt like a crumbling relic, the fireplace cold and clogged with soot, the roof dripping in steady intervals into a metal basin he had set overnight. Sierra, the German Shepherd K9, lay at his feet, her black and tan fur dusted with tiny specks of ash from crawling under the stove, as if sensing the warmth he desperately wanted to create. Rosie sat on a wool blanket nearby, coloring with her crayons, occasionally glancing at her father with quiet concern. Logan decided it was time to tackle the front yard and the broken shed. Pushing his chair through the uneven floorboards, he maneuvered toward the porch with effort, the wheels squealing slightly. The moment he rolled outside, the icy ground seized his wheels like a trap. The yard, muddied from melting snow, sucked at the rubber tires until they barely moved. Logan cursed under his breath, his muscular arms straining as he tried to push forward. Rosie ran to his side, her chestnut curls bouncing as she said softly, "Daddy, I can help." He gave her a tired smile and shook his head. But Sierra, ever alert, padded to the back of the chair, nudging it with her nose as if to push. Logan chuckled despite the frustration. "You're better than any engine, girl." Together, with Sierra's help, he managed to get the chair across the yard. The shed's roof sagged dangerously under the weight of wet snow. Logan glanced up, noticing the way one of the wooden panels seemed to shift with the wind. As he reached for a broken shovel near the door, Sierra suddenly barked sharply, her stance tense, ears pinned forward. He froze, looking up just as a large slab of icy wood slid off the roof and slammed into the ground where his wheels had been moments earlier. The sound echoed across the empty yard. Rosie screamed, then rushed to hug Sierra. Logan's heart pounded. Without Sierra's warning, that sheet of wood could have crushed him. He leaned down and patted the dog's neck, whispering, "Good girl, you just saved me again." Later, inside the house, Logan worked on clearing the old fireplace. He had grown used to doing everything with his hands while seated, his upper body strength compensating for his immobile legs. Rosie brought him small sticks from outside, her tiny hands red from the cold. Sierra curled by the hearth, watching him with those steady amber eyes. When the first flames caught, the warmth slowly spread across the room, making the frost on the window pane melt in crooked trails. Around noon, Logan decided to check the main road for supplies. He wrapped Rosie in her thickest scarf and pushed his chair carefully through the slush, Sierra trotting beside them like a silent guardian. The town's main street was almost empty, except for a few locals who glanced curiously at the soldier in the wheelchair. At that same moment, Allie Peterson, a young journalism intern from the next town over, was cycling past Maple Ridge. Allie was 23, with light brown hair tied in a loose braid, freckles scattered across her pale cheeks, and sharp green eyes that seemed to notice everything. She had come home to visit her grandmother, but carried her camera everywhere, capturing candid moments of small-town life for her internship portfolio. Allie stopped when she saw Logan. The sight was unexpectedly powerful. A broad-shouldered man in a worn olive jacket, his wheelchair cutting a path through the snow, a little girl walking beside him holding his hand, and a German shepherd walking in perfect sync on the other side. The late winter sun broke briefly through the clouds, casting a glow on their trio. Without thinking, Allie raised her camera and snapped a photo. She lowered it just as quickly, feeling a strange lump in her throat. She didn't ask for permission. Something about the scene told her this wasn't about intrusion. It was about truth. Logan noticed her but said nothing. He was used to people staring, some with pity, others with admiration. Allie gave a polite nod as their eyes met, then continued cycling. The image burned into her mind. By evening, the small photograph had been uploaded onto Allie's social media, accompanied by the caption, "Strength doesn't always stand tall. Sometimes it rolls through the snow holding on to love. #DadInTheSnow." Within hours, the post was shared beyond her circle. Something in that frame, the soldier, the child, the loyal K9, resonated deeply with strangers. Meanwhile, Logan was unaware of the growing attention. He spent the evening teaching Rosie how to toast bread over the newly lit fireplace. Sierra sat nearby, occasionally nudging Rosie's hand for a piece of crust. When the roof above the kitchen dripped from the melting ice, Logan made a mental note to patch it in the morning. That night, Rosie fell asleep early, curled up with her teddy bear. Logan sat at the table, scribbling notes on a scrap of paper, plans for repairs, supplies to buy. Sierra rested at his feet, her head on her paws, eyes half closed but still watchful. The house was silent except for the crackling fire. Out in the dark street, Allie cycled back past the house, her breath clouding in the frosty air. She glanced at the dimly lit window where Logan's shadow moved, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she whispered to herself, "People need to see this kind of strength." She pedaled off, unaware that her single photo was already becoming a small ripple of hope online. The next day would bring unexpected attention, but for now, Logan's world was small and simple. A broken roof, a warm fire, a little girl's laughter, and a dog who would never let him fall. The snow began to fall heavier that evening, swirling like powdered glass under the pale glow of the streetlight outside Logan's house. Inside, the fire had burned low, leaving faint embers that flickered on the cracked brick of the fireplace. Logan had spent most of the day patching leaks and fixing the loose door hinges with whatever tools he could manage from the wheelchair. Rosie, however, had been quieter than usual. Her small face, normally rosy from playing in the cold, was flushed with a deeper red. Her curls stuck to her damp forehead, and her hazel eyes looked glassy. When she coughed, a soft, rattling sound, Logan felt a sharp pang of fear in his chest. He placed a hand on her forehead, and the heat that met his palm made his stomach clench. "Rosie," he said softly, crouching forward in the wheelchair to meet her eyes. "How long have you felt this warm?" The little girl shook her head weakly, murmuring that she was fine, but her lips quivered. Sierra, lying near the fire, rose immediately, her sharp ears twitching as if she could sense something wrong. The dog walked over and sniffed Rosie's hand, then nudged Logan's knee with a quiet whine. Logan grabbed his old flip phone from the table and tried calling the nearest medical station, but static crackled on the line. After several attempts, he realized the storm had knocked out most of the phone reception in Maple Ridge. He clenched his jaw and looked at the clock. It was already past midnight, and the snow was piling higher with every gust of wind. Waiting until morning wasn't an option. Rosie was breathing faster now, her small body trembling under the blanket. With quick, practiced movements, Logan grabbed an old wooden sled from the shed behind the house. It was a relic from his childhood, but its frame was still sturdy. He fixed a makeshift harness to the back of his wheelchair and lined the sled with thick blankets, adding an old hot water bag he filled from the stove. Carefully, he lifted Rosie into the sled. His arms were strong, but the weight of his child made him feel every ounce of the limitations he now bore. He wrapped her tightly, tucking the blankets under her chin, while Sierra paced back and forth, barking softly, almost as if urging him to hurry. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Logan whispered, brushing Rosie's damp curls from her face. He grabbed the wheelchair wheels and pushed forward, the tires cutting into the thick snow with effort. Each push felt like moving through cement, but he didn't slow. Sierra ran slightly ahead, her black and tan fur blending into the shadows of the storm. Her paws crunched against the icy surface, and she stopped occasionally to bark, checking the path. The cold air sliced through Logan's lungs, but sweat rolled down his back under the layers of clothing. His hands were raw and red from gripping the wheels, and snowflakes clung to his short black hair, melting into tiny rivulets that dripped into his eyes. At one point, he leaned forward, his forehead nearly touching his knees, pushing with every ounce of strength he had left. Sierra trotted back and licked his gloved hand, as though to remind him he wasn't alone. Logan looked at Rosie, her small chest rising and falling under the blanket, and he whispered a promise to himself. He would get her there, no matter what. Halfway down the main road, a group of snowplows had not yet cleared the way, leaving a thick ridge of snow near the town square. Logan had to push at an angle, carving a path 1 inch at a time. It was then that Ethan Marsh, a 16-year-old boy with a wiry frame and a shock of untamed brown hair, came into view. Ethan was known in town as a curious soul, always with his phone in hand, streaming random moments for his friends online. That night, unable to sleep, he had been walking with his phone out, recording the eerie stillness of the storm for his small social media following. When Ethan saw Logan, a man in a wheelchair pushing through a blizzard, with a bundled child on a sled and a K9 trotting beside him, he froze. "Holy," he whispered to his camera, panning toward the scene. "Guys, you need to see this. This is what a real hero looks like." His live stream began to fill with viewers, comments flooding in as Logan's silhouette moved against the harsh wind. Ethan, moved by the sight, ran up to help. "Sir, can I help push?" he asked, his voice trembling partly from the cold and partly from awe. Logan glanced at him, his gray eyes intense but softened by exhaustion. "Take the front," he said, nodding toward the sled. Together, with Sierra weaving around them like a protective guardian, they made their way toward the small medical outpost near the church. By the time they reached the steps of the station, Logan's arms were numb, his gloves soaked. Ethan helped lift Rosie, her head lolling slightly, and they rushed her inside. The nurse on duty, Margaret Hill, a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair and warm but commanding brown eyes, took charge immediately. Margaret was a widow who had spent most of her life in Maple Ridge, known for her tough but motherly demeanor. She checked Rosie's temperature, frowned, and ushered her into a small examination room. Logan stayed in the hallway, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, as though they were his lifeline. Sierra sat pressed against his leg, watching every movement inside. When the door finally opened, Margaret gave him a small, reassuring nod. "She's stable now," she said. "Just a bad fever, but you brought her in just in time." Ethan was still filming quietly, though now his voice was subdued. "The world needs to see this," he muttered, posting a clip of Logan, wiping sweat and snow from his face, while Sierra licked Rosie's hand. Within minutes, Ethan's video began to circulate online, the comments filled with admiration and disbelief. Outside, the storm had not let up, but the warmth inside the medical outpost felt like a sanctuary. Logan leaned back in his wheelchair, exhaustion washing over him, yet relief flooding his chest as he watched Rosie sleeping peacefully under a soft quilt. Sierra, resting beside her, gave a quiet huff, as if satisfied that her mission was complete. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Maple Ridge wrapped in a shimmering coat of ice. The sun rose weakly, bouncing off the snow-covered roofs and casting long shadows over the quiet streets. Logan Carter woke early as always, his back stiff from sleeping in his worn-out recliner. He glanced toward Rosie's small bed, relieved to see her still sleeping peacefully, her curls sprawled across the pillow like a soft halo. Sierra, lying nearby, lifted her head and wagged her tail lazily when Logan stirred. The house felt warmer after the fire he had kept burning through the night, but its cracks and creaks reminded him that winter would soon test his strength again. Outside Maple Ridge, something unexpected was happening. The video that Ethan Marsh had streamed during the snowstorm had exploded across social media overnight. People from far beyond Vermont were sharing the clip of a man in a wheelchair pushing through the blizzard, a child bundled in a sled behind him, and a loyal K9 trotting by his side. Comments poured in. A real hero. This is what love looks like. Someone find this man and help him. Ethan, overwhelmed by the attention, had tried to reply to a few, but soon it was out of his hands. Local news stations picked up the story, and by dawn, larger media outlets were broadcasting it with headlines like, "Veteran Fights Snowstorm to Save Daughter." Unaware of his sudden fame, Logan went about his morning. He brewed a pot of weak coffee, then prepared cornmeal porridge for Rosie. His hands, rough and calloused, moved with quiet precision as he fed the fire and stirred the pot. Sierra nudged his side, eager to go outside, so he opened the door and watched the dog bound into the snow. Rosie woke with a sleepy smile, her fever gone, but her cheeks still pink. "Daddy, did the snow eat us last night?" she asked. Logan chuckled softly, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Not while Sierra and I are here, sweetheart." In another part of the state, Megan Walters, Logan's estranged wife, sat in a sleek downtown apartment. At 35, Megan was still strikingly beautiful, tall with flowing auburn hair and emerald green eyes, her features sharpened by expensive skincare and years of maintaining a polished appearance. She was having breakfast with Richard Hale, a wealthy businessman in his early 40s. Richard was a tall man with a lean, athletic build, salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, and a jawline framed by a trimmed beard. His tailored navy suit hung perfectly, even while he sipped black coffee with a practiced air of confidence. On the table between them, Richard's tablet displayed a trending news article. Megan scrolled absent-mindedly, her lips forming a faint smirk as she saw Logan's image. The wheelchair, the blizzard, Rosie's small figure. "They've turned him into some kind of hero," she said, her tone flat, though her fingers lingered on the photo longer than she intended. Richard, glancing at the screen, shrugged. "People love sob stories. It's good PR for someone, I'm sure." But when Megan zoomed in on Logan's face, the determined look in his eyes despite the exhaustion, her smirk faltered. Something about that gaze cut through the polished walls she had built since leaving him. She set the tablet down and stared at her untouched coffee, silent for a long moment. Back in Maple Ridge, Logan spent the afternoon repairing a broken axle on a neighbor's old truck. Tommy Dawson, the neighbor and an old friend of Logan's, had come by with a box of tools. Tommy was in his late 30s, with broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, and a dark beard that covered a perpetual grin. He had been a mechanic all his life, known for his easygoing humor and loyalty to those he considered family. He slapped Logan on the back, careful not to jolt his friend's wheelchair. "You're making the news, man," he said, holding up his phone. Logan raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Tommy handed him the phone, showing a clip of the video. Logan's expression hardened. "I don't need pity views." But Tommy grinned, shaking his head. "It's not pity. People are calling you a hero, Logan. Look, there's even a veteran support group setting up a fund for you." Logan didn't reply, but the mention of a support group caught his attention. Later that day, as he rolled back home, he noticed Sierra barking excitedly at a pickup truck parked outside. A group of men and women stood by the truck, all wearing jackets embroidered with the emblem of the Vermont Veterans Association. Leading them was Harold Briggs, a retired Marine in his late 50s. Harold was tall and lean, with weathered skin, a bald head, and a white mustache that gave him a distinguished but stern look. His voice was deep, yet warm, the kind that carried authority, but also respect. "Logan Carter?" Harold extended a hand. "We saw the video. Some of us chipped in to get you some help. Roof repairs, medicine for the little one, and a new electric wheelchair." Logan hesitated, pride flashing in his eyes. But Harold's firm handshake and the earnest looks of the group softened him. "We take care of our own," Harold said simply. Sierra wagged her tail and sniffed at Harold's boots, while Rosie peeked shyly from behind her father's arm, her hazel eyes wide with curiosity. The veterans got to work quickly, climbing onto the roof with new shingles, sealing leaks, and patching holes in the walls. One of the volunteers, Janet Miller, a petite woman in her early 40s with shoulder-length blonde hair and bright blue eyes, brought bags of groceries and a small box of children's books for Rosie. Janet, who had lost her husband in Iraq, smiled warmly at the girl. "Your daddy's a strong man," she said softly, kneeling to meet Rosie's gaze. Rosie hugged Sierra tightly and whispered, "I know." As dusk settled, Logan sat on the porch, watching the veterans work. For the first time in months, the house no longer felt like it was falling apart. He glanced at Rosie, who was happily showing a new picture book to Sierra, holding it as if the dog could read. Logan felt a lump in his throat, but said nothing. The world had seen him. But it was this quiet moment, with his daughter's laughter mixing with Sierra's soft huffs, that made him feel truly alive. The days following the veteran's visit passed quietly, though Logan felt a change he couldn't quite explain. The roof no longer dripped, the fireplace burned warmer, and Rosie laughed more often as she read the books Janet had brought. Sierra, ever watchful, would sit by the window every evening, her ears twitching at the smallest sound outside. The snow had thickened into a white blanket across Maple Ridge, and the old wooden gate in front of Logan's house creaked when the wind swept through. On a late afternoon, while Rosie was building a small snowman in the yard, Logan heard a faint crunch of footsteps beyond the gate. Sierra's ears shot up instantly, and she moved to the door, her tail stiff, letting out a low growl. Logan wheeled himself to the porch and saw a figure standing still at the gate. Megan Walters, his estranged wife. Megan was bundled in a long, elegant white wool coat that reached her knees, her auburn hair tied in a sleek bun beneath a gray beret. The winter wind painted her cheeks with pale red, but it could not hide the nervous tension in her green eyes. She gripped the handle of a small leather suitcase. The nails of her delicate hands painted a muted shade of rose. Even standing there, Megan exuded the same poised, graceful presence she always had. But this time, her posture was uncertain, as if she wasn't sure where she belonged. Rosie looked up from her snowman, her mittened hands still holding a twig meant for an arm. She tilted her head curiously, her hazel eyes narrowing in confusion. "Daddy, who is that lady?" she asked innocently, her voice carrying across the frosty yard. Megan flinched at the question, a quiet pain flashing across her face. Logan's voice was steady, but his gray eyes were cold. "Come in, Megan. We can talk inside." He pushed his wheelchair back, motioning toward the door. Sierra stood at the threshold, not moving, her body a barrier as much as a warning. Megan stepped cautiously into the yard, the crunch of her boots loud in the silence. Inside, the warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold tension between them. Logan watched Megan as she removed her coat, revealing a cream sweater and black slacks that made her appear even slimmer than he remembered. She clasped her hands nervously, glancing toward Rosie, who had followed Sierra into the house, but stayed close to her father's side. "I didn't teach her to hate you," Logan said after a long pause, his voice firm but not unkind. "But I also don't have the strength to create fairy tales for her. She remembers who stayed, not who left." Megan's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes welled up, and she turned slightly away, brushing at her face. Rosie looked at Megan with confusion, then whispered to Logan, "Daddy, why is the lady crying?" Logan gently placed his hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Go play with Sierra in your room, Rosie." The little girl nodded and walked off, the dog following close behind, casting a wary glance at Megan as she went. When Rosie's footsteps faded, Megan finally found her voice. "I made mistakes, Logan. I thought I was choosing a better life, but when I saw you on the news, pushing through that storm, I realized I left the strongest man I ever knew." Logan's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming against the armrest of his wheelchair. "You didn't just leave me. You left her." His tone carried no anger, just a deep, quiet disappointment that cut deeper than shouting ever could. The moment was broken by the sound of Rosie's laughter upstairs, and for a fleeting second, Megan smiled through her tears. "She's grown," Megan said softly. "She doesn't even remember my face." "Children remember actions, not faces," Logan replied, his eyes meeting hers. "You chose to be absent. That's what she remembers." The tension between them didn't end there. Within a week, Megan made a formal request to see Rosie regularly. Logan, wary but unwilling to fight bitterly, agreed to let a court decide. A custody hearing was scheduled, and for the first time since returning home, Logan found himself in a place he never expected: a courtroom. The town courthouse was simple, its wooden benches worn smooth by decades of use. Logan arrived in his wheelchair, wearing a clean flannel shirt and his old army jacket. Rosie's drawing, a picture of a small house with two figures, Daddy and me, written in uneven letters, was tucked carefully in a folder on his lap. He didn't bring a lawyer, he didn't have the money for one, and he believed his story spoke for itself. Megan, on the other hand, arrived with Peter Langford, a polished lawyer in his late 30s with neatly combed dark hair and sharp brown eyes. Peter was tall, lean, and carried himself with a quiet authority, his charcoal suit and silk tie giving him the air of someone who rarely lost a case. He greeted Megan with a reassuring nod before turning his attention to Logan. There was no malice in Peter's expression, just the professional distance of someone who had seen too many families break apart. As the proceedings began, Logan said little. When asked why he believed full custody was best, he simply held up Rosie's drawing. "This," he said in a steady voice, "is her world. It's small, but it's safe. I'm not here to win against anyone. I'm just here to protect the little girl who calls me her hero." His words filled the room with a silence that felt heavier than any legal argument. Megan's eyes brimmed with tears as she listened, but she remained seated, clutching her scarf tightly. Peter tried to counter with facts about stability and financial security, but even he seemed softened by the sincerity in Logan's voice. When the hearing ended, no final decision was reached that day. The judge requested further mediation, giving both parents time to reflect. Logan wheeled himself out of the courthouse slowly, Rosie's drawing still clutched like a shield. Outside, Sierra waited with Rosie, the dog's breath visible in the cold air as she wagged her tail, eager for Logan's return. Logan lifted Rosie onto his lap and whispered, "We're going home, sweetheart." Megan watched from the steps, but Rosie didn't glance back. Sierra stood between Logan and Megan, her dark amber eyes fixed on the woman with quiet judgment. The courthouse in Maple Ridge was an unassuming building of pale brick and weather-worn steps, but that morning it felt heavy with tension. Logan Carter sat near the back of the courtroom, his wheelchair positioned beside a row of wooden benches. He was dressed in his clean flannel shirt and a dark green military jacket, the fabric faded but still holding a quiet dignity. His strong shoulders were squared, his jaw set as though bracing for something worse than bullets. Beside him, Sierra sat like a sentinel, her black and tan fur sleek and her amber eyes fixed on every unfamiliar sound. Rosie was not in the room. She stayed with Miss Louise, the elderly neighbor, who had promised to keep her warm and safe during the hearing. Across the room, Megan Walters sat at a polished oak table with her lawyer, Peter Langford. Megan looked immaculate, as always, her auburn hair pulled into a neat twist, her cream blouse tucked into a tailored skirt. But her green eyes betrayed her nerves, darting toward Logan more often than she intended. Peter, sharp and composed, adjusted his tie and whispered last-minute advice to her. The judge, Harrison Cole, a man in his early 60s with a square jaw, neatly trimmed silver hair, and steel-gray eyes, entered the room with a deliberate calm. Judge Cole was known for his stern fairness. Years of presiding over family disputes had given him a voice that was both commanding and unexpectedly compassionate. His reputation was that of a man who valued not just law, but also the heart behind it. The hearing unfolded with formalities and statements. Peter argued that Megan sought to re-establish a relationship with her daughter and that her absence, while regrettable, was not beyond repair. Logan, however, spoke plainly when it was his turn. "Your Honor," he said, his deep voice steady, "I don't want to keep Rosie from her mother, but I also won't let her heart be broken again. She's just beginning to trust the world. I can't risk losing that." He paused, his gray eyes lowering to his hands. "I never asked to be her hero. I just want to be the one who stays." The judge listened intently. Megan's lawyer added points about financial stability and Megan's improved life, but Judge Cole seemed to weigh something beyond numbers and security. After a quiet deliberation, he returned with his verdict. Megan's petition for visitation was denied due to prolonged absence and lack of a consistent relationship with Rosie. The words landed with a finality that filled the room. Logan did not smile or celebrate. He simply nodded, gripping the wheels of his chair, and turned toward the exit. Megan remained seated, her hands trembling as she stared at the papers before her. For the first time, she looked less like the polished woman who had left him and more like someone who realized the weight of what she had lost. Outside, the air was biting cold. Logan rolled down the courthouse ramp, Sierra trotting silently beside him. He inhaled the winter air, the smell of wet snow and pine filling his lungs. Inside, his emotions were tangled, relief for Rosie's stability, but also a quiet ache. War had taught him that victories often felt like hollow echoes. When they returned home, Rosie came running from Miss Louise's porch, her cheeks rosy and her curls bouncing under a knitted hat. "Daddy! Did the judge like my picture?" she asked, referring to the drawing she had made of their little house. Logan's face softened. "I think it said everything we needed," he replied, lifting her gently onto his lap. Sierra barked once, her tail wagging, as though sharing in the reassurance. That evening, as snowflakes drifted lazily past the windows, Logan sat with Rosie at the kitchen table, teaching her how to write simple sentences. Her small hand gripped a pencil awkwardly, but determination shone in her hazel eyes. "Write a letter to yourself," Logan told her. "One day you'll read it and remember what you felt." Rosie giggled, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she scribbled, "Dear me, I will be brave like Daddy and Sierra." Logan chuckled and kissed the top of her head. Days passed quietly. Logan worked on small repairs around the house, and Sierra accompanied him wherever he went, whether to the yard or down to the local shop. Rosie, inspired by her lessons, began writing short notes in a small notebook Miss Louise had given her. "If Mommy stands by the gate for a long time," she wrote one day, "I will open it, but I want Daddy to hold my hand." Logan found the note later, his chest tightening as he read it. He didn't correct her spelling. He only tucked the notebook back gently. One cold afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, elegant, a touch hurried. Logan carried it inside and sat by the window, the envelope trembling slightly in his hand. He opened it slowly. The letter was from Megan. It wasn't long. She didn't ask for forgiveness, nor did she try to explain everything. She wrote about her regrets, about the sleepless nights she'd spent, wondering if Rosie would ever remember the warmth of her voice. "I am not asking to be in your life again," the letter read, "but I want you to know I see now what I lost. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I'm sorry I walked away. I don't expect you to forgive me, Logan, but I hope Rosie will know that I thought of her every single day." Logan read it twice, his face unreadable. He folded the paper neatly and placed it in a small wooden box, along with an old photograph of his fallen comrades from Afghanistan. Those were his private truths, memories and pains that no one else could carry. He closed the box and set it back on the shelf, his silence heavier than any spoken words. Later that night, Rosie climbed into his lap with her notebook. "Daddy, look," she said proudly, showing a new page. In uneven letters, she had written, "If Mommy stands by the gate for long, I will let her in, but only if she says sorry." Logan smiled faintly, brushing a curl from her forehead. "That's fair," he murmured. Sierra, lying beside them, lifted her head and wagged her tail gently, as if to agree. The morning sun cast a pale, silvery light over Maple Ridge, reflecting off the frost-covered rooftops and glittering like tiny shards of glass on the branches of the bare trees. Logan Carter sat by the kitchen window in his wheelchair, sipping lukewarm coffee as Sierra rested her head on his leg, her amber eyes following every movement. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of Rosie's humming upstairs as she prepared for her first day at the small local kindergarten. Logan's gaze drifted to the wooden box on the shelf where Megan's letter was kept, alongside the worn photo of his comrades from Afghanistan. The weight of memories seemed heavier that morning, as though the cold air outside had settled inside him. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, Colonel Henry Blake, a retired veteran in his late 60s, stood there. Colonel Blake was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short white hair, tanned skin from years of field service, and eyes the color of steel, sharp yet warm when he smiled. He wore a brown overcoat and a scarf knitted by his wife, and his voice carried the steady authority of someone who had spent decades commanding respect. "Logan Carter," he said with a firm handshake, "we'd like you to speak at the annual Veterans Seminar this weekend. Your story and your strength. It's what these men and women need to hear." Logan stiffened. "I'm not a speaker," he replied, his voice low. "I'm just trying to raise my daughter and keep a roof over her head. Talking won't fix what's broken." Colonel Blake studied him for a moment, then nodded knowingly. "Sometimes, sharing the truth helps fix the unseen wounds. Think about it. We'll save you a seat." With that, he left an envelope on the table, the official invitation to the seminar. Later that evening, as Logan read Rosie her bedtime story, she looked at him with curious eyes. "Daddy, why won't you tell your stories to other people? You tell me every night." Logan hesitated, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Because they're not easy stories, Rosie. Some things are hard to say." Rosie, in her soft, innocent way, whispered, "But if you can tell me, you can tell them. Maybe they need it too." Her words, so simple yet piercing, stayed with him long after she had fallen asleep, clutching Sierra's paw as if it were another bedtime friend. The day of the seminar arrived cold and bright. Logan wheeled himself into the community hall, wearing his best clothes, a clean navy jacket, a pressed shirt, and his old military tags around his neck. Sierra trotted beside him, her black and tan coat brushed to a healthy shine. Rosie sat in the front row, her chestnut curls tied with a blue ribbon, her wide hazel eyes glowing with pride. The hall was filled with veterans of all ages. Some were young, barely out of their 20s, their faces hardened by recent deployments. Others were older, with weathered skin and distant gazes. The room smelled faintly of coffee, waxed floors, and the metallic tang of anticipation. Colonel Blake opened the seminar with a few words, introducing Logan as a soldier who fought for more than just survival. He fought for the love of a child, and that's a battle every heart can understand. When Logan rolled onto the stage, he paused, scanning the crowd. His gray eyes flickered with hesitation, but Rosie's encouraging smile anchored him. Sierra sat at his side, quiet but alert, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Logan began, his voice steady but carrying the gravity of years gone by. "I'm not here to talk about medals or victories," he said. "I'm here to talk about the ones who didn't make it home and the ones who did. Broken, lost, or forgotten. I lost my legs to an explosion in Afghanistan, but I didn't lose everything. I came back to a daughter who calls me her hero, even on the days when I feel like anything but." He paused, glancing down at Sierra. "And I came back with this dog, Sierra, who saved me in ways I can't put into words." He went on to share stories of the men he had served with. Bobby Finch, who had laughed the loudest but never saw another sunrise, and Private Daniels, who sang lullabies to calm the squad on the worst nights. The hall grew silent, every breath in sync with his words. "I used to think my fight ended when I left the battlefield," he continued. "But the truth is, the hardest battles are fought here, in quiet houses, in empty rooms, where you have to keep going for the people who need you most." When he finished, the hall was so quiet that even the ticking of the clock felt loud. Then, as if one person had sparked the rest, the entire audience stood and began to applaud. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was a wave of respect, a standing acknowledgement of the courage it takes to face pain and still stand, even if standing means sitting in a wheelchair. Logan felt a lump in his throat, and for once, he didn't fight it. He gave a small nod, his eyes damp, and looked toward Rosie, who clapped harder than anyone, her smile as wide as the sky. In the days after the seminar, life began to take on a new rhythm. Rosie started attending kindergarten at the local school, Maple Grove Early Learning Center, a cheerful building painted in pastel colors. Her teacher, Miss Sarah Collins, was a kind, slender woman in her early 30s with warm hazel eyes, short honey blonde hair, and a gentle smile that made every child feel safe. Sarah had a way of speaking softly, but with such conviction that even the rowdiest kids listened. She was instantly taken with Rosie's quiet determination and the way the little girl spoke proudly about her dad and Sierra. On her first day, Rosie drew a picture that she presented to Logan that evening. 3 figures under a bright, clear sky. Daddy, me, and Sierra, she explained, pointing to each character. See? No mommy. But look, Daddy, the rain has stopped. Logan stared at the crayon drawing for a long time, the simple words beneath it cutting deeper than any speech he could make. The first snow of December blanketed Maple Ridge in a hushed, silvery stillness. It was the kind of winter day where even the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the world slowed to a peaceful whisper. Logan Carter sat on the porch of his wooden house, the same house that had once felt so broken but now stood proud with a repaired roof, fresh paint, and the soft laughter of a little girl echoing within its walls. He wore a simple dark blue sweater, the sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms etched with scars of both war and labor. His wheelchair gleamed under the soft winter light, a gift from the veterans group that had quietly become part of his new life. Beside him, Sierra lay sprawled, her thick black and tan coat dusted with snowflakes, her ears flicking every time Rosie laughed. Rosie, bundled in a cream puffer jacket and wool mittens, ran circles around a small snowman she had built in the front yard. Her chestnut curls peeked out from under a knitted hat, and her hazel eyes sparkled with mischief. She occasionally dashed up the porch steps to show Logan a tiny twig or a piece of red ribbon she wanted to add to her snowman. Every time, Logan would grin and nod, his gray eyes crinkling at the corners. From a distance, standing just beyond the old wooden gate, Megan Walters watched the scene quietly. She had returned to Maple Ridge a few days before, but this was the first time she gathered the courage to face what she had left behind. Her elegant long camel coat hugged her slender frame, and her auburn hair, tied neatly, glimmered faintly under the winter sun. Her face, usually composed and proud, now softened with something unspoken, regret mixed with longing. Megan's green eyes lingered on Rosie's laughter, the kind of laughter she hadn't heard in so long. Megan didn't open the gate. She simply stood there, her gloved hand gripping the metal latch, but never pushing it down. Logan noticed her presence, his sharp instincts honed from years of watching every movement around him. His gaze shifted from Rosie to the figure beyond the gate. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He didn't wave, didn't call her name. Instead, he remained still, his hand resting on Sierra's head as the German shepherd lifted her ears, watching Megan with a silent but firm curiosity. After what felt like an eternity, Megan turned away from the gate and walked to the mailbox. She slipped a neatly folded letter inside, her fingers trembling slightly, and then she looked one last time at the house. Rosie had stopped playing and was now cuddling against Logan's side, while Sierra's tail wagged lazily in contentment. Megan's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, a bittersweet smile that carried both sorrow and peace. Without a word, she walked down the road, her boots crunching against the frozen snow until she vanished around the corner. That night, after Rosie had gone to bed, Logan sat at the kitchen table with Sierra curled at his feet. He opened the mailbox and found Megan's letter. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, elegant and slightly slanted. He unfolded the page carefully, as though it might crumble under the weight of time. "You don't need to forgive me," it read, "but I want Rosie to know that I came back, and that I stood for a long time outside the gate. I will carry my mistakes for the rest of my life, but at least she should know I didn't walk away forever." Logan didn't say anything. He folded the letter gently, placed it inside the same wooden box that held his comrade's photo and Megan's first note, and closed it. There was no anger in his heart, only a quiet understanding that some wounds didn't need to be reopened. He wheeled himself to Rosie's room and stood silently by her bed, watching her breathe softly in her sleep, her hand resting on Sierra's paw. A week later, Christmas Eve arrived. Maple Ridge glowed with soft golden lights, wreaths hanging from every porch, and the scent of pine and cinnamon drifting in the air. Inside their small but warm house, Logan and Rosie sat by the fireplace. Logan handed Rosie a small, neatly wrapped box. Her hazel eyes lit up as she tore the paper and discovered a pale brown wool scarf, its stitches slightly uneven but warm and soft. "Did you make this, Daddy?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Logan nodded, smiling faintly. 3 months of quiet nights and tangled yarn. I didn't give up, just for you. Rosie wrapped the scarf around her neck and threw her small arms around Logan's neck, squeezing him tightly. "I love it. I'll draw you tomorrow, Daddy, in your nice shirt, not the oily ones you wear when fixing things," she giggled. Logan laughed softly, his chest swelling with an emotion that words couldn't capture. Sierra nudged his leg with her nose, as if to remind him she deserved some credit too. As the fire crackled and snow fell quietly outside, Logan realized that family wasn't about who stayed by blood, but who stayed by choice. Rosie's laughter filled the house, blending with Sierra's quiet huff of contentment. For the first time in years, the wind outside felt still, as if peace had finally found them. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with blinding lights or angelic voices. They come quietly, in the form of a father who refuses to give up, a child's laughter that melts the hardest winters, and a loyal dog who stands like a guardian of hope. Logan's story reminds us that God often works through ordinary hands, through perseverance, through love, through the courage to face another day even when life feels unbearably heavy. In our daily lives, we all face battles, some seen, some hidden. Yet, just as Logan found light in Rosie's smile and Sierra's unwavering loyalty, we too can find God's presence in the simplest moments: a kind word, a helping hand, a quiet prayer whispered at night. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder of faith and resilience. Leave a comment below. What miracles have you witnessed in your life? And if you believe, as we do, that God's grace is still at work in our world, type "In God We Trust" to stand together for hope. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that celebrate life, love, and faith. And may God bless and protect every single one of you watching right now.